Hi, my name is Steve Harper. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Owner Insight, and welcome to the Owner Insight Podcast. Today, we are interviewing Galen M, managing partner at Insurance Claim HQ. We're going to be talking about avoiding costly mistakes when legal meets construction. Super excited for this conversation, so let's dive right in. Galen, welcome to the Owner Insight Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Steve. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I am excited to have this conversation because I think that we could take this conversation so many ways because I know that one of the areas that you focus on is construction and how it ties into the insurance area. There are a lot of questions that come up about this, but before we dive in, give my audience just a little sense of, what you do, what you focus on, how you got into this line of work, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So the majority of our work is actually storm restoration. So we advise policyholders that have any insurance issues, as well as contractors and mitigation companies after a big storm, whether that doesn't have to be a storm. It could also be a wildfire, but some large scale disaster where
Okay.
insurance is implicated. We help guide them through that process so ultimately they can be made whole.
Okay. How was it that you settled on that as a specific area to focus on for your practice?
Yeah, it kind of happened by accident. So Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005,
Okay.
and I was a young man and wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. I came down, I volunteered, I helped out, and it was just in my marrow. So I ended up going to law school, becoming a lawyer, and couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Oh, that's fantastic. What's the most rewarding part of your job, would you say?
You know, insurance is a money game at the end of the day, right? It's just a
Yeah.
financial transaction. It's really not personal. But for the policyholders, it is
Feels
deeply
personal.
personal. It is
Yeah.
deeply personal, right?
Yeah.
There's no question.
Yep.
So for me, that's the biggest thing I would say is just knowing that what you're doing is really putting people back in their homes. It's making a massive difference.
Now, do you focus predominantly on residential or do you also do some commercial focus on the commercial space as well?
Yeah, so we do commercial and residential.
Okay. Okay. Do you find that there is a difference between how insurance companies respond or react in those kinds of situations if they're dealing with a business versus a homeowner?
A little bit. I
Okay.
wouldn't say massively.
Okay.
I would say that commercial claims are harder. They're harder to navigate, right? There's more complexity to them. So as a result, they can feel like they move slower. I would also say on smaller residential claims, some carriers, not all, will just refuse to pay or drastically underpay because they figure those people won't be able to find help, so it won't really matter. But
Yeah.
with the exception of those two issues, they're by and large treated the same.
Do you find that because of the nature, especially in a major tragedy like a wildfire or a hurricane or some major storm, that the insurance companies tend to try to bulldoze over the process quicker because they have so many claims that they have to settle in a particular area, so it becomes more of a impersonal process than
Um, Interesting. I think it's impersonal all the time. I don't think they really care. I don't think the carriers themselves care. Some of the adjusters do, and some of the adjusters
Okay.
are good people. And at the end of the day, some of the adjusters truly are overwhelmed in a catastrophe situation, like you suggest, right? If
Yeah.
they're used to handling 60 claims at any given time and they get 400, even if they are normally a great adjuster that really hears you out, they don't have the capacity. We're only human, right?
Yeah.
So that does play in generally, but I actually think what's worse is during a large scale catastrophe, companies start doing financial planning and they say, well, hold on, our risk is this many million or billion even. So what we need to do is come up with a plan to stretch out and slow down the hemorrhaging of that money. So I actually think it's worse than that. It's not just we're busy. It's, hey, this could be financially detrimental to us and we still have shareholders and we still need to keep our earnings high. So we're going to implement a strategy that actually helps us and sees this catastrophe as more of an earnings event than a loss event, which is what it should be.
Yeah. That's so when you get involved, when you're engaged to work with clients, typically is it a circumstance where the client has been met with too many roadblocks and they seek help? Or in the instance of a major catastrophe, are you guys moving into the area and saying, hey, don't take that first offer, or make sure you're reading through and understanding what's going on with your policy? Or how do you typically get engaged in one of those, kind of major events that occur?
Yeah, it comes down to consumer education, right? So
Okay.
on the consumer side, the residential side, the consumers are not particularly educated in how insurance works and what that process is. So what happens is we put out a lot of educational content. a lot of them do watch that and consume that. So when they hit those roadblocks, they call us because now they know, okay, what's happening to me is wrong. On the commercial side, especially churches, strip malls, big office buildings, and even municipalities, they're more likely because they've been through this and they just have resources to know how it's
Yeah.
going to go. They're more likely at the very outset. Same thing for big homeowners associations and condo
Yeah.
associations. They'll hire us on day one. They don't
Okay.
even want to talk to their insurance company. They want us to submit the claim so they can follow the requirements under their policy perfectly. They want us to be the people getting the information from the carrier, and they just want to have a meeting with us once a week or once a month to know
Just
how
get the
things are
update.
going, and they want to check. That's all they care
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. And so when it relates to like commercial, like you said, office buildings, maybe developers that have, strip centers or, even restaurants and hotels that are affected by these events. If someone didn't know about your service, and they're just, seeing this interview and, they could be prone to one of those situations happening, what are some tips or guidelines that you would suggest, to be aware of? Because I have to say, I checked out your Instagram. You guys do a great job educating the public about some of the challenges that you face when you're, in a circumstance like this that I don't think even me as a consumer I would have known without finding your channel. So well done there. But what are some tips that you might suggest for large organizations or developers, to not get themselves crossways or maybe out of sorts with the insurance process in general?
Yeah. So if you're a commercial developer, big commercial property owner, even property manager, I'd say the first and foremost, the simplest one is know your policies, like
Okay.
front, back, and center. Know them like the back of your hand. Have someone in your organization who is tasked with knowing what's required of you in the policy, because some of them have requirements that if you miss, you forfeit payment, right? So have someone that's tasked with knowing that, especially if you're not going to hire someone right away. You need to
Right.
know those things. The second tip or trick, which is very simple, none of these are really tricks. It's just knowing how to document damage. It should be a full-time job after a storm. If you have a big property or big portfolio of properties, it should be a full-time job after a big event to go photograph everything carefully. Like we call it like 333. Like I think it's supposed to be like 3 feet away, 3 inches away, like 3 millimeters away, right?
Okay.
Like
That's
so you
interesting.
take
Yeah.
and you might even get further like overview photos, but you need like up close and farther away photos because you want to be able to show everything. Because what will happen over time is it'll be harder to tell, well, what damage is old versus what
Yeah.
damage was from the storm.
So I'm curious from, we deal with Owner Insight, mostly commercial construction, and we work with a lot of building owners that, have either, done a ground up or they've acquired a particular property. What type of documentation is important for them to have from the very beginning, even before an event occurs? Like, how much reliance do you have on the drawings and the documentation that was generated when they built the building? How important is that for you to have to help support you in your work to reach a favorable settlement for them?
The claims that we resolve at like the highest satisfaction rate, which is what we call the closest we get to what our client would be happy with. Sometimes we'll get more, sometimes we'll get less, right? But the ones where we're at that number or more, new builds all the time.
Okay.
And the reason
Okay.
is because we have blueprints, we
Yeah.
have architectural drawings, we have invoices from the materials that were used. There's no fighting about was this a low grade, a medium grade, or a high grade. We know
That's
exactly what grade it was, right?
yeah.
And all the time we'll have adjusters come out and say, oh, that was low grade, I can tell. And I'm like, no, I actually
Here's
have an
the proof.
invoice from the builder, right? So if you built ground up, congratulations, because you're exhausted and you really want to put this stage of your life behind you. But like resist the urge to throw all that stuff away, right?
Yeah.
Digitize it all, scan it all, put it all in a file, because if something happens, that stuff will be your proof, your evidence as to exactly what blood, sweat, tears, and money went into that building. Same thing with the big renovation. It's not
Yeah.
much different. Now, I just went through a huge renovation of our office. What I learned is none of our blueprints or architectural drawings were accurate because it was a
Ooh.
renovation, right? I inherited
Yeah.
like a Franken building.
Yeah.
But because I'm in this because I'm in this line of business and we're using an architect and engineer anyway for the renovation, I went ahead and had them do updated drawings as part of that. So now if something
Perfect.
happens to this building, like even if it burns to the ground, I know exactly how it was constructed. If you can do that, that will help set you free when some insurance adjuster, and a lot of them don't really know much about commercial buildings. They
Yep.
come in and start making things up and putting in an Xactimate estimate, and it's just not reflective of the true cost that you went through.
That's fascinating and an excellent point. We get a lot of owners that watched our podcast and seek us out because of what we do and how we do it to organize information. And really, at the end of the day, is we become that sort of insurance policy in terms of the documentation and the data that went into their build. And the fact that you hit on that so hard, I think, is really, really important to point out to our listeners and our audience that that data has value, significant value down the road. What happens in a circumstance, and I'll come back to to the other part of this, but what happens when you don't have that information at the ready to help, to when you're engaged to deal with a client or deal with an insurance agent on behalf of a client? That makes your job harder, I would imagine.
Much harder. It becomes a forensic reconstruction is what we call it, right? So
Okay.
we have to reconstruct that building forensically, meaning without the benefit of actually having any documents to show anything.
How do you
Why?
do that? Do you mind? You
Yeah.
mind me?
So
Yeah.
how do you do it? And then why does it suck, right? So the
Yeah.
way you do it kind of explains why it sucks. Most commercial property owners we deal with, and anyone listening knows this is true, even if they don't think they're that type of person, they know they are. They're busy. They
Yeah.
have businesses to run. They have things to do. Maybe they're developers and they've moved on to 16 other projects. They A, don't remember, and B, they don't care to sit down and talk to me or another attorney in my office for 7 hours to go through every detail of this building. And
Yeah.
then they get mad when I want to talk to their contractor and their subs and all these people because they want to move on, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, our process takes us, the last time we had to forensically reconstruct a commercial building, I think we had 300 to 400 hours just in attorney time
Wow.
and talking to people affiliated with the owner or from the owner themselves just to figure out, because we didn't have any documents. There were no blueprints, no drawings, no invoices. So, I mean, we had to get nitty gritty because the whole place burned down. So we
Wow.
had to talk about what tile was in this bathroom. Where did it come from? Why do you need to know that? Because I need to know, because I need to get you paid, right? I know
Yeah.
this is the most frustrating and you don't care about the tile that was in the bathroom, right? But what I have is some adjuster that looked at a pile of rubble and said,
And
"Oh,
just
that's low contractor grade tile, I can tell." And then I find out that this was actually the executive level bathroom in an office building. So I know in my heart of hearts, like, it's probably something nicer. So I want to get you paid for that, right? And
yeah.
so the process is painful. It's interview based, it's memory based, it's testimony based. And then, of course, they have to believe you, right?
Yeah.
You have to first get the carrier to believe you. And then if you can't, you have to get a jury to believe you. And you have a vested interest in the outcome. So it's harder to
Sure.
be believable.
Yeah. That's fascinating. So that one case where you had 300 to 400 hours invested just to figure out the particulars, w- that's all billable time, right? And I would assume that's part of the settlement that gets built into the insurance settlement, right? I use the word settlement too many times, but
Yeah. Oh, I gotcha.
yeah, I mean that's part of what you're trying to get collected is the sum total of everything.
Yeah, and usually we'll work on contingency. So,
Okay.
that's kind of my risk, is I have to spend those hundreds of hours when it would have taken me
Okay.
less time. But more importantly, the risk is in the result, right? Because I'm going to have to recommend you compromise a little bit if you don't have any evidence of anything, right? And
Okay.
and that sucks. So it's not just the
Yeah.
billable time. We do have some clients that hire us on an hourly basis, and then of course something like this happens and they get angry when they see their hourly bills. But we're not running a clock to run a clock. We actually do contingency, so it actually benefits us to resolve your case for as much as possible in as short amount of time as possible.
So, in the circumstance of an owner that's maybe watching this and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't even know where any of that equipment, or excuse me, any of that detail, that data is." What would you recommend? Where to start now before you need it, before the situation arises where it's important to have it?
Document it now. Get your property
Okay.
manager, your maintenance guy to video the whole property, to take photos of everything, to take notes. If you want to spend a couple of grand on it, call any insurance adjuster, like a public adjuster, offer to pay them to come now and do something called a
Ooh,
docu-sketch or a Matterport of your property.
okay.
It'll be a 3D video rendering of the condition your property's in now. They'll probably do it for a couple of grand for you for a
Okay.
reasonable size commercial building. Now, if we're talking about a skyscraper, expect to spend more.
Yeah.
Um, but they'll actually create, but if you're willing to do that, but you can have your property manager do the down dirty version, right? But if you do the other one, you will have a 3D rendering of the condition your property's in today. So if later something terrible happens and they say, well, there weren't this many rooms, or it wasn't like this, or it wasn't like that, you can prove it almost as
Yeah.
well as you could with drawings and invoices.
So, I'd come back to the good side of the documentation, but it also brought up a question on the developer side. So let's say I'm, I'm acquiring, right? I'm a real estate
Yeah.
investment trust. I'm just acquiring properties left and right. The assumption that gets made, at least what we see in the clients that we work with, is, well, that information wasn't necessarily available, or I got the best that they had at the time. What, from your legal perspective, do you think, or what advice would you give someone that's maybe acquiring a building to push back a little bit harder to get more? I mean, would you recommend they do that study ahead of the acquisition? Is that something that, is there a process that you would suggest an owner go through, or potential owner go through, to make sure when they do close on that building, they have everything they could humanly possibly have on it?
Yeah, so the two steps I mentioned, I would just do post acquisition, right? The
Okay.
3D rendering or the other one. But as far as due diligence, during that due diligence period, a lot of times sellers just don't feel like collecting documentation and don't want to provide it. I see this all the time,
Yeah.
because I do
It's
have a
good.
couple of, yeah, they're like,
I
oh
got
no, we don't
drawings.
have it. We don't have it. So one of the things you do is say, well, hold on, because we're like, you almost have to bluff them a little bit. We're talking to other properties that have these things. So if you really don't
Yeah.
have them, that's going to go into our diligence.
Yeah.
It's something that's going to happen. You just push back, because again, we're not talking about more than a couple of grand of expense. And if you're a REIT and you're in the business of doing this, like, that's probably not the thing that's going to make or break your profitability ratio for these properties, but it is something good to have. And I find a lot of purchasers lose this documentation just because the seller doesn't feel like providing it.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. And keep in mind, we all know this, like, to the extent agents are driving something, that's a problem too, because
Yeah.
the agents don't want diligence.
Yeah.
They just want to close and make their commission for all that work they did.
Yeah.
And but so you
Paperwork
got to
adds
be aggressive.
complexity, right? We don't want that. No.
Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many agents are like, oh, if you ask for this, they could walk away from the deal. I was like, meaning you could lose your commission. Like, I'm trying to do a
Yeah.
deal. I'm
Yeah.
trying to do a deal that works for me, not a deal that works for you. So
That's
push
right.
your agent hard. If you're like, really know this, even if you are a trust, you've worked with the same agents forever, you trust and love them, be aware that your interests are not exactly aligned. They're not disaligned, but they're more interested in getting that deal closed. You're more interested in making sure it's the right deal. So push them a little more on the diligence.
I love that. And really, the underlying message there is they're trying to make their current problem your problem. And if they don't provide you the documentation, it's a bigger problem later that you might
Yeah.
come to regret. How does that play when you see it in terms of residential real estate? Is that something that,
Yeah.
you should be, as a, prospective homeowner or a buyer, asking that current homeowner for as much information and documentation as they can, going back to the builder if you can possibly do it and get all that information?
Always, but the reality
Okay.
is, in a anything other than a very recently built subdivision, you're probably not going to get it, right?
Okay.
You purchase a building that was a new build from the original owner, I would dig your heels in and demand the blueprints, the drawings, everything. But I understand if this is the sixth owner on a house, that stuff is probably long gone. You're probably not going to
Yeah.
get it. But again, revert back. Go take good photos, videos, or have someone come out and do a 3D rendering. Now, I get it. A $2,000 cost, $1,000 cost on a home that you're purchasing and maybe even flipping or maybe owning, that's between 100 and 300. That's not a great deal. That's not a great opportunity. But you still should do it because it protects you down the road.
Yeah. Do you find that, and this might change by jurisdiction or municipality, but do you find that the cities, the original plans or anything of that nature, is that helpful at all for that prospective buyer to go to the city to see what was originally filed, or is that not
Yeah,
possible?
assuming it was built to plan. I mean,
Yeah.
you do have, I think I called it like my building, a Franken building. You get Franken homes too, right?
Yeah.
Where they
Yeah.
were built 30 years ago to spec. And then some random homeowner built an addition, maybe didn't even pull permits. So you got to look out for that. I feel like I see that a
Yeah.
lot with residential properties where I've actually gone back, gotten blueprints for clients. And then I'm looking at the drawings of the home, like the drawings our adjuster did. And I'm like, wait, there's whole other rooms here. There's like missing walls, moved walls. Like, none of this is accurate. But I would say with limited success, yes, you can get that stuff from the city.
So, based on the work that you do, what do you find that are some of the most misunderstood areas that lead to denied claims or maybe prolonged litigation in either residential or commercial?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. Number one, it's being uncooperative, and number two, it's being too cooperative. So what do I mean? Um, what I mean is you have certain rights. So, but you also have certain obligations under your policy. There's a whole section of your insurance policy, commercial or residential, that say your duties after a loss. And
Okay.
it lists all these things you have to do. And you have to do them. In some states, there are various laws that protect you, but in other states, you can be straight up denied for not following those. The other problem is there's usually this very vague provision under there that says you have to cooperate with us as reasonably necessary. Reasonably protects you, but they love to use it against them. Like, I mean,
Mm,
we had a home, it was a residential home, but it was a massive residential home with a like $3 million roof. And the issue was the copper, right? They wanted to come get the copper. We're like, where in the policies does it say you get to own my client's copper? They said, it says you have to cooperate with us. No, we're not doing that, right? Um, and so, but the thing they do is they use this cooperation clause. So first, you need to cooperate, otherwise you'll get denied. But on the flip side, they use this cooperation clause to try to create ambiguity and vagueness in the claim so they can deny it. They also will tell you to do something that if you stopped and thought about it for a second, that wouldn't really track, but they'll use it later to deny. Let me give you an example. After a big fire or hurricane claim, sometimes the adjuster will say, oh, you need to make a list of everything in your home. Not everything that's damaged, everything.
mm,
So the policyholder proceeds to make a list of everything. And this happens on commercial too. I see this with churches a lot. They don't
okay.
make a list of the things that are damaged. They make a list of everything. Now the carrier can say you committed fraud by submitting a false inventory list of undamaged items.
Oh,
So you're so cooperative with them that you do what they're saying without thinking about it, and you actually are creating a problem for yourself.
that is, oh, wow. That's fascinating and also scary. So what, I guess from two perspectives, right? As a homeowner or as a commercial property owner, engaging someone like you involved in the process, do you work with clients before there's ever a need to evaluate the policies and look at what some of those gotchas are so that they can, like you said, if that was a commercial, you'd have somebody on staff that goes through it, becomes that subject matter expert. But let's face it, a lot of companies aren't going to do that. So did they bring you in to do that on a pre-need basis, right? To evaluate and
Yeah.
understand and then, obviously be ready to go if there is a problem.
Yeah, so we're really blessed to have relationships with a number of investment trusts and property management companies that it's kind of a trade-off. We look at all their policies in advance, go through the pitfalls, even make some advice in terms of purchasing that might make sense for them. And then in exchange, when the time does come and they have a claim, we have an opportunity to at least pitch them on why they should use us. So we do have
Yeah.
those relationships with some folks.
That's fantastic. Do you recommend that not just for commercial, but also homeowners to do the same? If it's not with you, but someone local that they might work with, have someone go through that policy with them so they understand the potential blind spots or pitfalls they might be signing up for?
Absolutely. For a couple of reasons. Number one, it's just smart. Number two, it's a little bit easier for homeowners because your policy, if you're a homeowner, is going to be one of a pre-approved form from your insurance and from your state insurance commissioner in most
Uh-huh.
situations. So there's not going to be a lot of variance in your policy. So an attorney that does this for a living is going to be able to look at the numbers on the bottom of your insurance policy and your endorsements and be like, okay, here's everything you need to know, right? But the second reason is that issue after a big disaster, and this advice applies to homeowners and commercial property owners alike. Everyone becomes an insurance attorney. Um, every attorney becomes an insurance attorney. I mean, attorneys that were doing divorces last week are suddenly experts in insurance.
Yeah.
Especially car accident lawyers, because technically
Yeah.
they do insurance claims, so they can honestly say they're insurance lawyers. After a big hurricane last year, I heard for the first time storm lawyers. All these people are storm
Okay.
lawyers. I don't even know
Yep.
what that is. So if you do this on a pre-need basis, you actually develop a relationship with someone that does this because no one's falsely advertising they do this before there's a storm, right? So now you've got a relationship with someone. So when the storm does happen or the big wildfire, you already have a name of someone you feel comfortable with that you can trust. And that should be your first call, not the person that takes out the billboard that says they're a storm lawyer because you don't have time to vet those. You're in crisis mode.
Yeah. I have a kind of a related question because when you are in the middle of crisis, putting your hands on the documentation and the data is super critical. I would imagine that your recommendation would be, and we've seen this with school districts where they've had a fire or a flood, all that documentation, all that paperwork was stored locally, right? And now it's gone, right? Because of the situation. What do you recommend owners do on any level, residential or commercial? Digitize that?
You know the answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Digitize it, save it on the cloud. Look, I get it. I'm kind of old school. Like when I go into a deposition or a trial, I've got stacks of paper, I bring boxes. But in today's world, there is no reason to not have backups of everything saved on the cloud somewhere, where you're going to be able to get your information in a crisis. And school boards are like the exact, I have seen, like I've
Opposite.
represented school districts that had major
Yep.
disasters and they couldn't get me records. And I'm
Yep.
like, how are you going to prove these poor kids went there? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
just digitize everything.
Uh, Galen, we have lots to talk about aside from this podcast. I think we should find some ways to work together in a lot of
Absolutely.
ways. But if there were a couple of key takeaways that you would want to leave with our audience, and you're super busy, so I want to be respectful of your time. But any last tips or suggestions that you might make? I mean, just the one that you said, having an expert on staff that goes through these things, or a firm, on speed dial like yours that can help in these circumstances. Anything else that you think our audience might benefit from hearing from you?
Yeah, I would say the big things, which we've kind of covered, are document your property both before and after, know where your paperwork is, and know your policy.
Okay. And before we let you go, tell everybody how they can find you. You've got a great Instagram. You've got some good social media handles. How is it best for people to find you? And do you serve clients throughout the country, or give them some sense of where your primary service areas are?
Absolutely. So you can hit us up on any social media like Facebook, Instagram, Insurance Claim HQ. You can call us at 844 Claim 84. You can reach out to me directly on social media. I'm very responsive. We serve pretty much the whole country.
Okay.
Last I checked, we weren't serving Alaska, but the other day we got a case there and we ended up finding a great lawyer there. So we expanded into Alaska. So
All right.
if you're in
Fantastic.
the US, we're interested in helping you.
And you did mention that you work with a lot of school districts, so that's
We do.
we that's one of our bailiwicks. So we may be able to send some work your way.
That'd be awesome. We'd love to work together.
Well, Galen, thank you for the time. Thank you for your expertise. I mean, there is so much that I actually need to go back. You made me nervous, honestly. I need to go look at my insurance, but I really appreciate you spending time with us and coming on the Owner Insight podcast.
Likewise, Steve. Thank you.